Hey, I'm Mehul. We're here at Microsoft Build 2014 conference, and I'm here with Mads. Now, Mads, can you please introduce yourself for those who don't know you?
Yes, my name is Mads Kristensen, and I work on the ASP.NET and Visual Studio web tooling team. So what I do is I build all the web tools that goes into Visual Studio for web developers. So HTML, CSS editor, less CoffeeScript, Sass now, and JSON as well. And also the Eureka team, which is the team that builds the page inspector and browser link.
Oh wow!
So a lot of web tools goes on, and and then I have this little hobby project of mine called Web Essentials as well. Right. So a lot of web tooling.
All right, so you covered a lot there. Let's break it down a little bit, okay?
Yep.
First of all, for one guy, that's a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
How do you do it all? I'm kidding. but to give me a quick recap of some of the stuff that you introduced in the last VS 2013. You said the Sass Editor.
Yep, Sass and JSON. Those are our two new editors. So Sass is a different approach to doing CSS. So we've had less introduced a year ago in Visual Studio, and less and Sass are sort of similar in that they are supersets of CSS. So they allow us to create CSS that has reusable components and variables and all those things that we're missing in CSS, right? CSS is very limited and very static, and now we get like almost programming languages for CSS.
Right.
Now, then it looks like CSS actually. So any CSS document is a valid less or Sass document as well. But when you change the file extension from .css to .less or .scss, which is the file extension for Sass, then Visual Studio through Web Essentials will compile your files into CSS. And then the browser understands what's going on. So it allows you to do some really rich and fancy UIs very quickly, and very reusable components, as I said. And so less we've had for a while. And less is really good because it's so easy to get started with. It looks so similar to CSS. You're using sort of the same syntax, the same structures and so on. Whereas Sass is a little bit more powerful. You can do more. You do like loops and more programming style things. And it might be a little bit more difficult to get started with, but you also get more power. And people have been asking for Sass for a long time. So ever since we did less, I always got the question, what about Sass? Well, here it is.
Nice.
And so we updated the less editor as well. And when we did that, when we were done with that, then we attacked Sass. So both editors are super high-end. They're really, really smooth. They are great. They flow IntelliSense through all your files, your import chains, and all this sort of stuff, as you would expect from any editor in Visual Studio, really. And so we're really proud of both less and Sass. Yeah. So that's
the JSON editor.
Yes. So yeah.
Now, typically, when you first told me about it, I was like, JSON editor, right? Because I don't typically create JSON. JSON is usually auto-generated from my service or something. So why a JSON editor?
Yeah, there's two good reasons. So in the case that you were mentioning, let's say that you're just going to open a JSON file that is the output of some web API or whatever, right? You want to be able to open it in a way that makes it easy for you to read. So something as simple as syntax highlighting and colorization of properties and values and so on. It's just going to help you when you kind of just glance over the file, right? But more and more configuration files are using JSON. And those files you want to actually edit, right?
Right.
So if you ever run something like JSHint, which is a static code analysis tool for JavaScript files, the way that you specify what rules should be applied, think of fxcop, right? fxcop for C#, it has rules that you can set up, like it has a configuration. For JSHint, it also has configuration, but that's all in JSON. So what we've been able to do with the new JSON editor is to give you IntelliSense, in this case, specifically for the JSHint configuration file. This is a file called .jshint.rc, right? So we actually give you full IntelliSense, not just for the properties, but also for their values. So there's a lot of scenarios where, especially when you're dealing with this sort of configuration, where you normally would sit in the documentation online to figure out what are the different properties I can set and what values do they have. But you don't have to do that anymore. because now it all just slows in IntelliSense. You can very easily see what's going on. You even get like a description in the tooltip over what the different things are doing, the different properties, and so on.
Right.
So we can do some really rich things. And of course, all this is extendable. You can apply any schema you want. And that's the beauty of this, because we're using JSON schema. So this is an emerging standard. We currently support draft version 3 and 4. And of course, we will keep enabling as soon as draft 5 come out and we get a proper standard. We'll follow along and make sure that we're always up to date. But you can write your own schemas, right? You can write your own stuff. You can provide your own IntelliSense. And the cool thing about a JSON schema file is that it's just JSON. And now we have an editor for you, right? So you actually use the JSON editor in Visual Studio to create the schemas that drives the editor for JSON. It's sort of funny, but we kind of closed the loop there. So great experience for rich JSON capabilities. We're very excited about this.
All right, very cool.
Yep.
Anything you're looking future-wise? So let's say, you know, we're here at Build, and your session has just happened. You showed some cool stuff. Can you talk about what you showed off?
Yes. So I talked a lot about Web Essentials. So my talk was about building modern apps with Visual Studio and Web Essentials.
Sure.
So I went in and explained some of the new stuff with Web Essentials and what it is. People get this confused a lot. A lot of people think that Web Essentials is an official part of what my team is doing or what Microsoft is doing, the web team is doing, and it really is not. Right? It's an open source project for the community, by the community.
Is it mainly, I understand it started off as a labor of love for you.
Yes.
Right? You wanted to improve some things in Visual Studio and you said, hey, I can do that, and you just started coding on a weekend or something like that. And is this still mostly you in your time?
Well, what happened was that last year at Build, I open sourced the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Right, and sort of a core team has formed, and so there's specifically 2 guys, Adil and Shabsa. Awesome. They're actually writing a lot of code, like a lot of code. And so the speed of which the features are now being added is much faster than before, because I think we're up to having 22 different contributors. We have a sort of a core team, but yeah, I still write a lot of code whenever I have the time, of course. And for me, it's just fun because, and every developer has this feeling, right? That's probably why we're developers to begin with. It would be cool if.
Yep.
Right? It would be cool if I could do this and that and so on. So that's one aspect, and that, you know, I'll wake up in the middle of the night sometime and think, oh, yes, I need to write this down, you know, and then in the morning I would just code it up. So yeah, I just added this feature. And some of the features are really, really small. Like the stuff I add there are like just, you know, as I said, I woke up at night or I see someone do something on stage and say, hey, I can make this better. And then I just code it up. And that's really, really satisfying. But the cool thing is that everyone can do that. So we all have this itch, you know, it would be cool if.
Yeah.
So that's one part of it. The other part is, hey, there is a bug in Visual Studio, or there's something here that is not optimal somehow for my flow. Right, go fix that. And what happens with Web Essentials is a lot of the features there, we actually graduate and roll into Visual Studio itself. So over time, all the good ideas, all the valuable things in there will become part of Visual Studio.
See, I've heard that before then, in sort of the timeline of things. I remember, I think even Scott Hunter had mentioned that in the past, that sometimes, is that a testing ground in a way? Ah, okay.
It's more than just a testing ground, it's also sort of a labs. Well, we don't always know what's going to work and what's not. You know, some things are going to stick, some things are not. Like, this is a great way for us to prototype it and see what works, what doesn't. The stuff that works, I mean, that goes straight to our backlog, right? Luckily, I'm the guy with the backlog in the web tooling team, right? So I just added to the backlog. And at some point, we're going to get the time, and then we're going to implement it. And sometimes we don't really know, like, how should this feature work? We know it would be cool if it could do something, but how it does it, we might not be sure of. Like, what's the best user experience? So in that sense, Web Essentials becomes our playground, and we can we do different iterations over the feature, and whenever it lands and we're happy with it, then it gets into the backlog of the team, and we know what to do, right? And we prioritize it against any other item that we want to work on.
Just as a quick aside, how do you figure out if it's going to work or not? Do you have some kind of metrics you're collecting from it, or?
No, it's either because that I can see that it really adds value, we get good feedback on Twitter or something like that,
right.
or that I just think that it's good, you know?
Okay, nice.
Yeah, and most of the time that's easy because, hey, I have a specific need for a specific thing, and it could be a small thing. If I solve that and I'm happy, chances are that a lot of other web developers will like it too. But the cool thing about putting it out open source, having people give people the opportunity to try it, like maybe a year before it reaches Visual Studio, is that we can fine tune it. Yeah. We can fine tune that behavior, right? So that when finally it comes in, it's going to be rock solid and really, really good. So it's in that sense, it's really a testing ground, as you were mentioning. So sort of labs, testing, both of them, and just experimental. There's a lot of things there that we know that's never going to make it in, or it's very unlikely to make it in because it might be too niche, too small a feature, or we never landed the right user experience. Right. So it's fine to keep in Web Essentials because sometimes I'm using a feature and it should work like this. Like maybe 6 months after I build it, oh, I did it all wrong, I should do this instead. Right? And then it all makes sense, and then we might bring it in. So, you know.
So let me switch gears a little bit and talk to you about sort of the things happening with the client side.
Yes.
I saw in Scott Hunter and Scott Hansman's presentation earlier, they were showing off some things with Angular.
Yeah.
And you handling the tooling aspect of it. What's happening with Web Essentials and some of these client-side frameworks like Angular and Ember?
Yeah. So actually, I just released the version 2.0 of Web Essentials today. That's compatible with the Visual Studio 2013 Update 2 RC.
Oh wow.
All right. So, and there I have Angular IntelliSense for the JavaScript editor included. So Angular proves to be really difficult for tooling because everything in Angular is internal, and they use their own dependency injection. That all happens internally. We can't from the outside go in and look at that. So I had to jump through hoops and do a lot of different things. And actually I work with a member from the community that figured these things out. And so we collaborated a little bit on GitHub, and finally we had something that worked. And now it's out there. So you get full IntelliSense for not just the built-in services of Angular that ships with Angular, but any custom directives or controllers or anything you do yourself will now light up, and you get the full IntelliSense with JS doc comments, and it's really, really a nice experience.
That's very cool.
So that all shipped today.
Congrats.
Yes, thank you. So we're very serious about Angular. Angular and Bootstrap, as you were mentioning, those are, as we see it, the two strongest libraries and frameworks out there for modern apps, for CSS and JavaScript respectively. And we have some great stuff for Bootstrap as well. So we have some of it is actually already built into VS, and we're going to have a lot more coming in Web Essentials as well over the next couple of months. But right now, we make sure that if you forget something and get some class names for Bootstrap, we will actually give you a validation error. So Web Essentials have this built in. Now we're gonna, that's so important that's definitely going to be graduated into Visual Studio itself. Right.
Now, does that even work with the custom themes that come with Bootstrap? And
it will. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Right, because they're still following the paradigm from the.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
So we can really create rich tooling around it, not just to make you faster, more productive, but also to catch common mistakes. And both of those are really, really valuable. So you want to make sure that everything works, and when you build websites, you do something and you see how it looks like in your browser, and it doesn't work. Why? Well, if you're new to Bootstrap or Angular, that's difficult. So the more help we can give you, both validation and IntelliSense and hints and tips and tricks that kind of light up in the editor as you write your code, the better it is.
Right.
So we're going to work a lot toward that. And so we already have some stuff, and more is to come.
You know what else works in Bootstrap?
Say it again?
You know what else works in Bootstrap?
What does?
We do. I had to sneak that in there.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. But now, what do you find is direction you want to take Web Essentials into, right?
Yeah.
What are some things that, well, let's start with this. What limits does Web Essentials have, being that it's an extension, right?
Yeah.
Because is it limited to some of these smaller things?
No, it's definitely not. I mean, we can do whatever we want, and an extension in Visual Studio actually has real power. You can do pretty much whatever you want. An extension is not limited in any way.
Oh, okay.
As long as there are APIs available in Visual Studio, then an extension can take advantage of all of them. and you can do anything you want, like using any .NET libraries or whatever that you use today. You can use that. You can do file manipulations. You can do whatever you want, right? So there's real power there. Now, where Web Essentials kind of starts and stops is very difficult to pinpoint.
Yeah.
Because my initial idea is that it has to be web. It has to be about web. Because if I'm just going to start doing all sorts of things for SAML or C++ or any of these sort of things, then it'll continue to grow.
Right.
And so there is no limit to it, and then Web Essentials might not be the right word anymore,
exactly.
Even, right? So
SAML Essentials should be something else. Right?
Yeah. So I try to say, okay, if it's relevant to web development, then it fits in there, and that could be small things, it could be big things. So there's really no difference in between like small or big things. Like we have the entire compilers for Sass and Less and all those things running in Node.js inside Web Essentials to run the compilers. I would say that's a big thing, like in terms of lines of code and just the complexity of it. And then we have really small things like, hey, let's put a little color icon next to CSS color values, right?
Right.
So there really is nothing that's too small or nothing that's too big. But the challenge now is, as I see everything grows, I just updated the entire folder structure, so now we have a folder per feature area.
Oh, okay.
So you have a folder called CSS, JavaScript, CoffeeScript, iced CoffeeScript, and I started looking through that folder structure and see that it's pretty big. Like there's a lot of editors that are involved here, a lot of different features.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that I limit it. And one way to limit that is to prioritize at Microsoft, right, in the Visual Studio web tooling team, to start pulling in features so that we don't have features lingering for too long in Web Essentials, but that the good ones we roll in, and we actually do that actively and more frequent potentially than what we've done so far. Just to keep the footprint down, make sure that Web Essentials is lightweight, and of course, as any app grows, any application grows in size, it also grows in the testing that's needed, and we can't test everything. So the bigger Web Essentials is, the more error prone it also becomes.
Right.
And so we want to see how small we can keep it at all points in time. But that's basically up to me to say, okay, we now need to roll stuff into Visual Studio. And when I say roll in, we don't actually roll in. We don't take the code, right? Because it's written by someone like me, and I'm actually a program manager. I'm not a developer, so you definitely don't want to take my code, right?
Yep.
Definitely not. So. But we take the ideas, say, hey, this is how it should work, right? And that's what we add to the backlog, and then the developers take over and they implement it the right way. So graduation doesn't mean we just take the code and move it.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was really worried about, right?
Yeah.
Like Mad's code sneaking into VS.
Yeah,
right?
you don't want that.
Yeah.
Definitely don't want that.
Yeah, I heard Scott Guthrie talking. He was not happy about it.
No.
Kidding. But let's give people an idea, because I think I've painted Web Essentials kind of wrongly here, right?
Okay.
It's not just a testing bed. There's things in there that can help people today.
Oh, yeah.
So can you point out a couple of those features? Like, I can't even think of, there's so many in there.
Yeah, I mean, there really are so many. I actually keep like a chart of all the different features that it provides, and well, it's over 100 features specific for web development that you get on top of regular Visual Studio 2013.
Right.
And some specific ones we already talked about, but I try to be as cutting edge as possible, and some of it is, hey, we give you super great intelligence when you're dealing with the Open Graph API that Facebook is spearheading.
Oh, wow.
That's one thing.
It also helps you check, things like your markup and.
It helps check your markup.
Does it integrate with that web developer checklist at all, by any chance?
It actually does. So webdeveloperchecklist.com. You should go check it out if you haven't seen it so far. It's sort of a checklist that you follow whenever you're sort of ready to deploy your website, to make sure that you follow sort of best practices. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually experimenting with that through BrowserLink, so that when your page is rendered in the browser, BrowserLink automatically reports back errors that it finds on your page, like, hey, you're missing a robots.txt file, or you don't have a description meta tag. Also, because that's for search engine optimization, that's important, and other things like that. And that's all stuff that's coming from the web developer checklist. So I want to make sure that Visual Studio is always sort of one step ahead of you, and that you can think of it as your pair programming buddy.
Yeah.
Right? Like a thinking IDE that sort of, oh, if you did this, then you probably want to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And if we can then present to you, hey, just click here to do that. Right before you even realize it, like that's where we want to go, so that your apps are better quality without you having to really do any effort to get there. Right? It sort of just presents itself, and it becomes a natural part of your workflow. Right? That is key, and I think what we're doing with Web Essentials and with the browser link integration and all the Angular, Bootstrap, all this sort of intelligence and validation, that's really where it starts to shine. And we can see the benefit of that as web developers. I started Web Essentials because I found that I've needed more features. I felt that I was limited. I felt that the IDE was a little bit in the way sometimes. It didn't provide me the support I felt I needed to be more productive. So that's the general idea of Web Essentials. Like, get all those missing features in there, small little details, they're all important. Like I've said this many times before, it's about the details. And it's incredible. So you build software, you know this. It's all about the details and delighting the users and get them to the end point faster than before.
And especially on the web, there's so much to think about. So especially things like the developer checklist is so helpful. I highly recommend it. All right, now, are you still blogging on your personal blog? Where can people find you?
Kristensen.net. I blog there every once in a while. I will have a follow-up blog post here where I'm going to list all the different extensions that I showed here in my session here at Build, because I'm using a lot of different ones. And the funny thing is that a lot of people, they're a little bit afraid to install too many extensions, but they don't realize that most extensions actually don't do anything unless you click a specific button or something like that. So they don't slow the machine down, they don't do anything wrong. And so I'm going to have a nice blog post about where I list all these things. And Twitter is a great place to reach me, Kristensen. I'll keep you updated with anything news related to Web Essentials, web tooling in general. I read all this boring, dry specs from the W3C and the browser updates and so on, and I relay that message to you on Twitter, so you don't have to read all that boring stuff, right? I do that for you.
Yes.
So that's.
And we can ask you questions as well, right? So that's awesome.
Hey, I need to read all that stuff because I'm actually in Web Essentials. I'm starting to implement all the new JavaScript APIs. So you now have full IntelliSense for stuff like the vibration API, server-send events, HTML imports. All that sort of stuff you get in Web Essentials right now in the version that was just released. So I go through all those CSS and JavaScript and HTML documents on W3C and make sure that they're always up to date in Visual Studio when you're using Web Essentials.
Well, thank you. All right, look, we'll post links to that stuff. Now, I have to just share one last story, right?
All right.
I've been a fan of Mads Kristensen for a long time, ever since that your personal blog, way back like 10 years ago, was probably not just for myself, for others, people as well, right? When you're looking at the blog, and I'd be reading, I'm like, man, that's exactly what I needed. You know, maybe it was like an image, something with ASP.NET. And then I'd look up about the about, and I'm like, who's that 16-year-old kid, right? And I was just like, oh, it's Mads. Okay, nice. So
that was back in the day when I had when my blog was called the .NET Slave.
That's right. Yeah. And now that you're 17, you know, you're just Web Essentials.
I have my own name now. I lost the .NET Slave name on my blog, but and I don't blog as much anymore. But that's what I did back then. I just blogged everything, every little tip and trick I could find, and people liked it. It was awesome.
Yeah, you know from the numbers, it was super helpful. So, all right, man. Thanks very much. We'll post links. Definitely check out his site.
Yes.